Those who have walked this land before us, where we come as little children to share the breath of life with you, and thank you for allowing us to come cold and tired through strange uplands and through strange lowlands to this place. Thank you for allowing us to share it with you today.
Thank you, Haley. Hello, everybody, and welcome to an afternoon with Traditional Pacific Navigators. This is an event brought to you by the Royal Institute of Navigation and the Pacific Tradition Society, and with a big thank you to Royal Museums Greenwich for their kind support in hosting us here today. So this is an event that has been born out of Dr. Marianne George Mimi, who reached out to us in the summer of last year, just to see if there was any scope to collaborate between the Institute and the Society. And we were initially really pleased to be able to feature the project as part of our 75th anniversary exhibition in September, but we're absolutely thrilled to be able to host this dedicated event today. I'm going to introduce the people that you're actually waiting to hear from in a moment. But first of all, just a quick reminder of the agenda. So we're going to have a series of short presentations with Q&A, followed by a coffee break from 2:30 to 3. We'll then come back for a few more presentations and a panel session. So I'm going to introduce your chairs for this afternoon's proceedings, Lars Eckstein and Anja Schwartz. They are both professors and teach at the University of Potsdam. Over the past decade or so, they have conducted research on the Raiatean Tahoa Tupea, who joined the crew of James Cook's Endeavour in Tahiti in 1769. Lars and Anja could show that Tupea's famous map of the Pacific is the result of an elaborate translation from one highly sophisticated system of navigational world-making into a very different other. More recently, their focus shifted to a wind positioning system Tupea shared with a British officer that bears striking resemblance to the navigational system taught by Paramount Chief Koloso Kaveia in Taumako. So you'll be hearing a lot more about the significance of that. Lars and Anja, I welcome you to the stage.
Yorana tatou, kia ora, talofa, bula. Herzlich willkommen. Welcome, good morning, good afternoon, everyone. My name is Lars Eckstein. This is Anja Schwartz. We teach at the University of Potsdam, as you have just heard. We live in Berlin. It's an honor for us to chair this conference in this very prestigious institution, and we want to thank the Royal Institute for Navigation for hosting this on behalf of the delegation, the very, very profound and important knowledge holders who are in this room. I want to briefly begin by explaining how we come to this particular space and how we have come to know the delegation. Anja and I have worked over the past 10, 12 years now on a map that a Polynesian master navigator called Tupaya, a native of Raiatea in the Society Islands, drew in collaboration with various officers of Captain James Cook's Endeavour. They met in Tahiti, Tupaya joined the crew, and they drew a map of almost all the important Polynesian archipelagos, with the exception of Aotearoa, New Zealand. That map had been a mystery to Western scholars for centuries, basically since 1769, when it was first conceived. And it remained a mystery because Western scholars tried to understand it within the frameworks of Western cartography. we started to do research into all the available documentary evidence about that map that is there, all the versions of it. And we could ultimately show that what this map is all about is not a Western map, but the attempt by a Polynesian tahua, a knowledge holder, to translate for Europeans his way of being in the world, relating to the world, and orienting in the world into a Western representational model that his European collaborators would use, which is categorically different from the model that Tupaia would have used. At one point in our research, when we believed we have understood the map, it became clear to us that we need to know more about how Tupaia actually did navigate. We understood how he translated for the Europeans because those were concepts that we know, a map, a compass, and stuff like that. But how would Tupaia have done it? We began to look into the voyaging societies out in the Pacific, and what we found is that for the Polynesian voyaging societies that are out there, the models that they use, they don't really match up what we found in the historical archives, what we can deduce from the little snippets of evidence how Tupaia may have done it. Now, those systems used in Polynesia are mainly driven out of Hawaii, and in those parts of the world, there are no continuing knowledge traditions that link back to the voyaging knowledge of the ancestors. So a lot of that has been developed in a planetarium, and a lot of that draws on select teachings from Micronesia and the Micronesian master navigator, Maupialuk in particular, from Satawal. But it's essentially a modern system. It's an amazing system. It works. It does really, really important cultural work in the region. But if you want to know how historical navigation in Oceania happened and how some people who still continue those traditions, those ancient traditions, do it, it doesn't help a lot. So we reached out to the person who holds a lot of that knowledge in terms of reaching out to the people who still have it together, and that is Mimi George, a couple of years ago. Mimi has worked with the people in Taumako, that is in eastern Solomon Islands, for decades, and recorded the profound knowledge of one of the last Polynesian master navigator, Paramount Chief Koloso Kaveia, and she knows the people who still practice the ancient arts, like Mario and Lolo Benito here from Puluat and Saipan, like Setareki Ledua here, who operates the only drua in Fiji, like Sanakoli John, whom I don't see, Sanakoli, who's sailing a traditional Sailao in PNG, and they're connected with the ancient traditions. So when we knew that those people will travel to Vancouver together in Canada, where they're invited to the Impact 5 Congress mainly organized by indigenous North American peoples to protect the oceans and to draw on indigenous knowledge from around the world to be helping to sustain and save our futures. We scraped together all the money that we have left at our university accounts to bring people over to us in Berlin, and this is where we were for the last couple of days with the delegation, where we were hosted by the Berlin Humboldt Forum. That's kind of the equivalent to your British Museum. We went with them to the exhibition spaces there and to the depot spaces, and that was an amazing experience. Partly because they looked at all the things, the boats on display, and said, no, that's not right, the rigging's wrong, that mast needs to be there and stuff. So museum people very often don't know what they do because they don't reach out to those people who still know how it's done. And to be fair, we've just seen the Pacific Encounters exhibition and the Te Alo that is on display there, the Te Puka that is on display there. It's not right, you know. There's a lot you guys here can take from those people and learn from those people who are here in the room. We've held a 2-day conference in Berlin for the past 2 days, and that has been one of the most amazing experiences in our lives. And the exchanges, the friendship, The fact that we are now part of their waka means the world to us, and I think you're very privileged to have those people here in the room. We believe to have those people in the room here is profoundly important for science, because those people hold knowledge that Western science has not even managed to tap into, though they are descending from people who've been managing to populate that part of the world, that largest ocean on the planet, in targeted migration voyages, millennia ago, centuries ago, whereas Europeans only began to be able to do that in the Enlightenment period, in about the 1770s. And the way that they do this, in a holistic model of navigation, where the navigator reaches out and the world reaches into the presences of the navigators and the selves, and you don't think only about stars, but you think about how stars relate to swells, how swells relate to weather, how moon, bird life, fish life, and everything, belongs together to allow you to fish up islands after islands after islands on your migration voyages. That is something that is important. It's important for science, and it's important for the future of the planet, because it's those people who know how to build boats in remote places without extracting petrol, without extracting things that are then turned into fiberglass or plastic, but stuff that's sustainable. And they can navigate those boats and sail those boats to re-establish networks, to do trade, in ways that are really, really important for the future. So listen to them closely. There's so much we can learn. And Anya will introduce the first speaker of the day.
Yes, you're not here to hear us, so I will be brief, but I want to just also give weight to the moment. The first person you're going to hear from is Vaikawi, who is the grandson of Paramount Chief Koloso Kaveia, one of the most important master navigators of remote Polynesia. Luke grew up and still lives on Taumako in the Santa Cruz Islands. Luke assisted his grandfather, Paramount Chief Koloso Kaveia, in establishing the Vaka Taumako Project, images of which you see here, to train a new generation to build voyaging vessels and navigate using only ancestral designs, materials, methods, and tools. That's one part of Luke's career. Luke is also, or was, and I think we should stress that as well. For instance, for 25 years he commanded the Solomon Islands Maritime Police and initiated international maritime resource monitoring in the region and safety programs for the Solomon Islands. So he's a sea captain in a system that we would recognize and that many in this room probably understand much more about than I do, as he is a navigator in the sense that Lars was introducing. After retirement, Luke attended the founding of the Holau Vaka Taumako Project, and he was elected as executive director by the Taumako community membership. That group, among the many things they do, is they promote ancestral voyaging knowledge and cultural practices to enable and to mitigate and adapt to climate change in the region. So please help me in welcoming Luke to the stage.
Thank you. So much and so proud to be in this room, and as a patient come from a very small island called Taumako, and if you go to the Google, you zoom for Taumako, you will not see it. So small that you can't see. But I will tell more about Taumako today in my presentation. Yeah, so we look as been introduced, the director for the Holau Vaka Taumako Association, an association which I established back in 2021 with the thinking that the traditional navigation and boat building that is not popular to the world today, especially in Taumako. So I try to revive and make sure that our people knew how to build and navigate a traditional voyaging canoe.
You must do her tongue. No sound. Oh, yeah,
That sounds like my great grand uncle Tamaki. He sailed his Phuket all over Timor.
Yeah. Excuse me.
Yeah. Oh, you have to use this one.
As I said, I come from an island in which no light, no power. It's a very new thing that I see the best technology, so I'm here up. Yeah, so in Taumako, I come from an island where the sea separates us. And the ocean, as we say, is the only means of bridging our islands together. So we use the ocean for trading, for communication, and for building friendship with the other islands that we're in the ocean here. Traveling in those ocean is how we can observe our environment, our maritime environment, how we respect the ocean, and how we care for the ocean traditionally. And also that how we bridge ourselves and know other people from islands by to sailing. We feel that the ocean itself is part of our family. We use the ocean every day. We spend about 90% of our time in the ocean as people living in the coast. So yeah, I say our life is mainly depend on the ocean for survival, for trading. So the ocean is more like a part of us. So in Taumako, we say that if we cannot do any sailing or make any voyages, our islands will be die, and the ocean will also be dying. And when the ocean is dying, in our culture we say the planet will also be dying.
Oh, there it goes.
Okay. Yeah, put it there, Mil. Go back. Put it there.
No, I know what to do. Okay, you talk.
Yeah, so that's a type of vessel that we built in Taumako. And we call that as the Vaka Taumako. It's a Taumako canoe. And it's the vessel that our ancestral that built many years ago. And these vakas are safe, friends to the environment, economically sustainable. As back the islands, we experience very high fuel cost in the islands. So that's how I come up with the idea of reviving back the canoe. So the Taumako traditional voyaging canoe, as you saw there, is purely built on local bush materials. And those materials are environmental friendly to the environment and to the ocean. In Taumako, where the ocean is held together with honor and pride and respect. As you saw, we give the code of our firstborn child to the god of the ocean as an offering. And we call that as we offer the code to the Tesua o Moana, the gods of the ocean. So we greet the ocean by perfume rituals. Every time when we go to sea, this is a tradition that we have to do some offering to the ocean. So this is a ritual to our ancestors, the spirits of the sky, the spirits of the ocean, just purposely for asking the gods to guide us. As we know, the sea is not a good place to be. And the ocean is ours to amass wealth in trading and exchange of goods and building relationship and making contacts and render aids to other inter-islands and neighboring islands and beyond. So today the Holau Vaka Taumako Association, that we started back in 2001, is in great need to reconnect with our neighboring countries, like Vanuatu and Fiji and PNG. But the difficulty of meeting the cost of border crossing and with paperwork. And the border boundary that being in place now, and the use of passports to across those borders is something that to me is one of the barriers that we not achieve this. But we are looking forward to do it. So every generation in the Holau Vaka Taumako, our plan now is to sell the traditional Vaka to these islands, to a neighboring country, to establish and reunite as partners where our ancestors before us been going through. So the Holau Vaka Taumako Project, we are looking at that we must revive the use of traditional voyaging canoes and the use of traditional wave fighting techniques to those islands and the nearby countries. So by establishing this understanding and friendship with those inter-islands and countries and making voyages through marriage and partnership to those islands, so we can create and learn from each other about sustainable ways of living. So we can strengthen and create a network. To learn from each other about a sustainable ways of living. We can strengthen and recreate networks and making peace and create a sustainability for everyone. Our voyaging networks makes us aware of what animals and plants needs to be conserved and how we must adapt to the strong sea rises and changes of climate in our islands. as the COVID-19 been experienced past years, that COVID is really putting me and something in my head that I have to revive that treasure canoe. During the COVID, the line was shut down as the transport from the capital and the provincial headquarters. So, yes, we really want to go into reviving that traditional canoe. Yeah, so I think that's why I want to sit here. So I want to thank everyone for coming today. And now coming here as the University of British Columbia and Fordham University. So Mimi really put things together for us to come and stand up in front of you here. But so thank you very much for listening, and I'm looking forward for any question that you want to ask me. I'm ready to ask. So thank you too much.
Okay. Sit down, low down, low couch. Waiting number 3. Introduction for.
So we'll have question time after the next 2 presentations that are all to do with the Vaka Taumako Project, so it makes sense for them to actually have questions together. And this is why it's another great honor to introduce you to Delsie Betty Bosi, who was a teacher by profession and still is. We experienced you in Berlin, Betty, as the most amazing teacher. Betty's work is very much concerned with the ways of preserving and conserving marine life and land resources. The islands being depleted by logging, for instance, or the harvesting, the excessive harvesting of marine resources. Betty has left her teaching career, though, to work with women and youth in the community in Taumako. Today, she's the administrative assistant of Holau Vaka Taumako Association, and her work is very much to do with the support of matrilineal rights and privileges of girls and women to protect island reef and inter-island resources and relationships. She's also promoting traditional structures of educating boys to be mentored again by men. And together with the association, she works very much in the attempts to reopening the very things that Luke was also talking about, the reopening of ancestral sea routes between islands and across borders, in the attempt to reactivate traditional values in the region that will benefit the protection of that environment and the relationships that are embedded in it. Please join me in welcoming Betty to the stage.
Good afternoon, everyone. I stand here on behalf of the women of Taumako and also the youth and the children. In our culture, the women and the youth and children are the silent people of the population. So I'm here. Whatever I will share this afternoon will be on behalf of the women and youth and children of Taumako. So in many creation stories, especially in the Solomon Islands, these creation stories derive from feminine being or a feminine spirit that, these people share down through the generations that gives birth to tribes or a tradition or things like that. So that's not much different from Taumako. In Taumako, the ancestral navigation story had transpired from a woman. And that woman is named Hinora. So today, the first part of my presentation, I'll share with you the story of Hinora as being the first. I will not say that she's the first woman on Taumako, but she's the woman that made the navigation story on Taumako, the wayfinding, traditional wayfinding tradition on Taumako, like it has transpired from that woman. So if you had been following the story of the Vaka Taumako Project, there's this story that Lata, who is the first navigator and the builder of the ocean-going vessel we call Tepuke, has derived this knowledge to build the Vaka from Hinora. And so Hinora is being regarded in this story as, the protector of the land, the custodian of the trees, of the ocean, as we will hear in this story. So Hinora is the owner of the tree, and when in the custom story, or the tale that is being widely spread in Taumako, and we believe that is the beginning of the traditional navigation wayfinding method in Taumako, is that when the bird showed Lata the tree, that tree was owned by Hinora. And so Hinora helped, when Lata went to get this tree, Hinora helped Lata to build the tepuke, to build the Vaka. And all the designs, everything that has Lata put into the building of the Vaka is derived from or has been explained to him by Hinora. So she was the one who showed Lata everything to do. Now, when Lata finished or completed building his Vaka, then Hinora ordered the skies to blacken and lightning to strike and everything, and then there was heavy rainfall. And Lata built his tepuke up in the mountains of Taumako. So when this heavy rainfall came down, all the water flooded down to the sea. So it made it easier for Lata to float down his tepuke to the sea. That's why in Taumako they call this Vaka, or traditional boat tepuke, which means floated down. Now, not much has been heard from these tales back in the early 1900s about women in navigation. But lately, there has been some women who are involved in traveling on these tepukes through the inter-island sailing, or through trades and building friendships and all these things that Luke has talked about earlier. Some women were on those voyages. But they were on those voyages only because it has been the captain has to say it's okay for you to be on that tepuke before these women will would be on those voyages. There were stories of women who were on those voyages because the chief of Taumako would have other relationship on the other islands like Santa Cruz or the reefs. They have friends there, and they would take all these women on the boat without their knowledge to, marry them to the other islands. Likewise, in the same way, on traveling on these routes, these chiefs or the men on the Tepuke would select, through this friendship, they would select other females from other islands to take back to Taumako, inter-island marriage between the islands. So that's one way of putting women on these voyages in the past. We have also heard stories, most recently, I think in the 1960s, about women actually doing all these voyages between Reef and the Santa Cruz. But not like in the past 10 years or 20 years, not much have been, no Tepuke voyage has involved women. Now, so maybe we might ask, what are the traditional roles, or why is it important for women to be involved in the building of Tepuke? And there are some important roles that women played in building traditional Vaka or Tepuke. And one of these is weaving the sail mat. In the culture of Taumako, women, by the age of 3 or 5 years, they are being trained to weave baskets or other ornaments for decoration or to wear, like in the past. And so one of the important role is weaving the sail mat for the Vaka. The other important role that women played in this building of the Tepuke is sharing of food or preparation of food for voyaging. And at the same time, when the men are working on the Tepuke, they would feed them. So 3 to 6 months before the actual voyage, these women would start planting gardens or planting crops so that during the time they make the Tepuke, that would be the food for them to eat. Before the actual voyaging, they would prepare, like 2 to 3 weeks before the voyage, they would prepare what we call masi, that is made from breadfruit. They would ferment that underground, and that would be used for food for the men on the Tepuke. I think, sorry, I'm late. They would also bake food like fish or potatoes or breadfruit in what we called umu, or they underground. They put stones. They light the stones up, and then they bake the food with the stones. That would preserve the food for some time during the voyage. Like you've seen in the other slide of that woman burning the breadfruit, or what we call the kulu in Taumako, that is for them to preserve the food as well. And it will be dried, and that will last them for months during the voyage. So that's how women are also important in, they also play an important role to help the men in building a traditional canoe in Taumako. So on these voyages, the women, one of their role too is if a woman is present on a voyage, her role would be to share food to the sailors or the voyagers, and to chew what we call betel nut, a nut that we chew in Solomon Islands, for those that, the old men or the men that do not have teeth to chew the nut. So that is one of the roles that they play during a voyage. So I would like to conclude about what is or what does the future hold for women in traditional navigation, in sharing the traditional navigation knowledge of the people of Taumako, and in preserving that in Taumako and with us all or into the future, is that what we are doing now, we want to see more women involved in all these voyages, not only to build the sail, which is the main, as important, the sail is as important as the Vaka itself to sail, but we do not only want women to be doing all these traditional women roles, but also to involve in future voyages on the Tepuke to other islands. Yeah, and we want to involve more youth and children to train them in acquiring these knowledges and to appreciate their culture for generations to come. So I think that's what I want to say. Thank you so much.
So I introduced the last speaker to talk about the Vaka Taumako Project, but to talk about Taumako, and it is Mimi George, who lives on Kaveia Island, Hawaii, and who is by training a cultural anthropologist. But when Lars and I got to know you, Mimi, you're so many more things, and it seems like almost anything we learned about research into traditional voyaging in the Pacific, Mimi was there. No matter where you go and who you sort of find out about, Mimi was there, and there's a Mimi story about all these things, and very important stories. She's here as the principal investigator of Vaka Taumako Project and director of the Pacific Traditions Society. That work supports training of youth to apply ancestral voyaging knowledge to current problems, including unemployment, biodiversity loss, and climate change. Mimi is also a documentary filmmaker, and she's produced this documentary film at the request of people in Taumako, for instance, in the Solomon Islands, but also in Papua New Guinea and New Ireland province, to document the traditional knowledge and the vessel building that is being carried out in these regions. We also got to know Mimi is incredibly passionate about the future of this planet, about the importance of this knowledge for all of our survival. And so I'll hand over to Mimi to talk about all of this. Thank you, Mimi.
Thank you. So, first of all, I must say thank you deeply to the Royal Institute of Navigation and to the National Maritime Museum. My first learnings were in European modern navigation. And so for me, and really for all of us here, to be here in Greenwich, the heart of the time and space of European navigation, is extremely appropriate for drawing some of the differences and I think also some of the similarities. So I want to, now, I'm assuming that for this audience you can bear to be shown a bunch of diagrams. What I'm going to explain in these diagrams is what it is that's systematic, what it is that's holistic about the knowledge system, which really is all through the Pacific and all through Oceania, traditionally. The ancient system, 30,000, 70,000, 30,000, 3,000 years ago. So, and the holistic nature of it. As Anya stated, I did not go to Taumako asking or wanting or planning to do any research, but visiting there with Dr. David Lewis, with whom I sailed for 13 years, and with whom I hope you all are familiar with his book, We the Navigators, and his many exploits in around the world, sailing the first catamaran around the world with his family, etc. The first transatlantic races. So everything I'm telling you was what Te Aliki, Koloso, Kahia, Kaveia wanted to have documented, and wanted it to be in English versions, English explanations, so that not only his descendants, but people outside could begin to understand, because it has not yet been understood. The revival efforts that began, most notably, most known is Hokulea sailing out of Hawaii to Tahiti. As Lars said, that was a system made up in the planetarium, a star system, but it's much more than stars. And people in Hawaii were unable to learn it. And in fact, they were from their own elders, because hundreds of years before Captain Cook arrived there's no record of any long-distance voyages out of the Hawaiian Islands. It had stopped after the Tahitian invasion. I mean, I'm talking about oral tradition and any historical. So, okay, so he wanted documentation, and he also wanted his grandchildren to get cameras, which he had seen, they had not. Most people in Taumako didn't know what a camera was, to do the documentation of their own heritage. Okay, so David Lewis wrote his book highlighting star navigation. Why did he do that? Because he was trying to counter several hundred years of narrative that said that people didn't know what they were doing. They got to these islands over a third of the planet by accident. And so he knew that star navigation would be convincing to Europeans, because he knew they have a star navigation system, which was what he was trained in initially. But fortunately, David went to the native school as a child in Rarotonga. And so he was also aware of chants that gave traditional directions, such as he put away his instruments and followed from Rarotonga to what's called New Zealand. So anyway, what came up, what Kaveia wanted people to understand, I translated We the Navigators book to Kaveia when we first visited in 1993. And the next morning, after 2 days of translating, the next morning we went to breakfast. We were at his home, and he asked David, would you like to know how we really navigate? And this is what he started to explain. What has been called the wind compass in dozens of diagrams and drawings, a lot of them on T-shirts these days around the Pacific, being called the wind compass. And you see these are all from different places. There are many more, but they're all oriented with north on top. it may not be easy to see all of the north, east, west thing, but they're all oriented that way. Why? Because the Europeans who wrote them down thought, well, they must be, because, you know, we use magnetic compass, so what? Okay, so some of them were more complete than others in the sense that they had more positions being shown. These positions are around the horizon, so we are in the center. This one has 32 positions. This one from Satawal, which was documented in published in 1980, now, for the first time, there is a rendering of a so-called wind compass that puts east and west as up and down. And why? Because this researcher, Japanese researcher, was interested in ecology and weather. And he wrote an article called The Fighting Stars, the Storm Stars. And he was explaining how when certain stars rise and set, there are storms. Now, the explanations, the teachings of Te Aliki Kaveia get much more complicated. Not that anybody knew any less in the Pacific. There are so many people who know much more than has been reported. But you see, this is a rendering of 32 wind positions around the horizon. And Kaveia was very clear explaining that this is a system that in which the horizon is equally divided between positions. So there are 8 primary positions, and then there are 16 in between, and then there are, in between those, then there are, it makes up 32, but each of those wind positions has a partner. So they're not taught one at a time around the circle. They're taught with their partner. And the partner is, as you can say, it's opposite the circle, opposite side of the circle. But it's not about opposition. It's about how they work together when you navigate. And by the way, this navigation is one use of the overall knowledge system called Te Nohoanga Te Matangi. So this system of knowing how the world works is also very much used for gardening, for fishing, for planning social events, and everything else. So one of the first things that Te Aliki Kaveia was explaining was to begin to understand the system in terms of wind positions. Where the wind can sit down in positions around you and come to you. So the eye of the wind at all these different positions. So the next thing he explained is that where the sun rises and sets through 1 year. So if it rises, does this work? Yeah, wow. So if it rises at the solstice in Teolunga wind position, then it sets between Te Tokelau and Te Tokelau Palapu, yeah, somewhere in between there. It varies. It varies where it sets. Okay, number 2 position, that's, what is that? Teolunga, Te Palapu, Te Alunga. So that's, it rises exactly there, and it sets precisely at Te Tokelau. It doesn't move around like like that one did, like the first one did. Number 3 rises at Te Tonga, sets in those, between those two positions, yeah? And number 4 rises exactly there in that wind position, Te Ulu Tonga, and it sets also somewhere in those same positions. Okay, so we don't have time to talk about why that might be. Maybe it has to do with the elliptical orbit of the Earth. There are various things that, and I haven't heard any astronomers or scientists, hard scientists, take this on. But it lets you track the sunrise and sunsets through the year in terms of wind positions. Here are seasons by wind positions. When the wind is predominantly between Te Tokelautu and Te Ulu, that's the trade wind season. Here is the cyclone season. Here are the in between the two main seasons. Here are the solstices and the equinoxes, which define the beginnings and ends of the season, all in terms of wind positions. Not wind directions, wind positions. And here's a drawing of various routes that a vessel can make in between islands of the Southeast Solomons and Vanuatu, as far south as Espiritu Santo. So again, defined by wind positions. You don't make those voyages unless it's in those wind positions. I mean, that makes sense to any sailor. But I'm just trying to show you how everything is geared, everything is coordinated and related to each other through wind positions. Whoops. Okay. So one more example. Each of those yellow lines, one end of it is where that celestial body rises, and the other end is where that celestial body sets. So Hetun Davo is the Pleiades. And these are the actual rise and setting positions, of wind positions of these, I think there are 10 of them, celestial groups, asterisms, celestial groups. This is the ones that are useful for navigation. So Hetum Davo has the return of Hetum Davo. So if Hetum Davo rises above the horizon there and sets there, then they're using Hetum Davo to navigate when they cannot see it. A clear difference with European celestial navigation. And if you compare, there are more like that. So if you compare just those 10 rises and sets of asterisms, you can see there are more differences. And what's interesting is that not only are they using stars and celestial bodies and dark places in the sky, the movements of those for navigation, but they're using all of that with relation to the wind positions, and they're using a lot of it when they cannot see it, when it's below the horizon. So what we have here is partners between star groups. For example, this group partnered with that group. So one's below the horizon, one's above. What you can also notice is that there's certain weather that comes with the rise or set, usually the set of each star group. Now, in the case of Hetum Davo, where are you? In Hetum Davo, when that rises, there are going to be 5 or 6 days of very strong winds and rough seas. Not a time to be voyaging. And some days later, still in what we would call July, this star group is going to rise, and there will be 3 or 4 days of rough weather, wind from the west and such. And they're partnered. Everyone is partnered. So this is that's what I'm trying to say. It's a holistic system. What modern, European, Euro-American, whatever, navigation, maritime, modern tradition is to separate the weather. All you do, we have a star system, and now we use a satellite. It's still a star system, and it has nothing to do with the weather. The weather's like whatever it is. It's an obstacle or whatever, but it doesn't help us in navigation. With them, it's a part of navigation. I don't have time to go on and show you how swell patterns fit into this. Actually, I think I have one more slide here. Yeah, so this slide adds in, we have the seasons. This slide adds in the routes between those particular islands and their wind positions. And the swell patterns, as some of you sailors, I hope, know, when anywhere in the Pacific, you can distinguish anywhere except when you're in the direct lee of a big enough island. Anywhere you can distinguish at least 4 different swells coming at you. The northwest storm, the southwest storm. No matter you're in the far northeast of the Pacific Ocean, you can distinguish. If you're trained, if you've sailed enough or whatever, you can see that southwest swell. The trade wind, the northeast trade, the east-southeast or southeast trade winds coming from the south, you can feel those in the far northwest. So it takes training. There are also lights that modern science knows nothing about, called telapa. We don't have time to go into that either. There was an article in the Royal Institute of Navigation newsletter, November, December, about the swell patterns that I wrote. And in the second of our films, Our Moana, there are navigators, not only from Taumako, but from Fiji and other places who explain about the human relationship to the swells, the stars, the wind, calling the wind. I've been doing this for 45 years, and it used to be when I started talking about calling the wind, or when I was seeing people do it and experiencing it working, incredible years ahead prediction of what the weather would be in a particular month, the audience would start fidgeting and walk out even. But now, people, I'm seeing your faces looking like, yeah, that's interesting. Well, it is very interesting. There's an introduction to it in that film, and we gotta move on. I'm talking too long. Thank you.
Thank you. Luke and Betty, would you please come up? And we thought that we didn't really talk with the organizers, so I'm not sure, but would it be okay if Luke and Betty and everyone sat there and we used this microphone, which is the microphone one for them to answer questions coming from the audience. So Luke and Betty and Mimi, would you take a seat here? And there's someone there with a microphone on that side and then also there. So this is Laura and Lena who very happily take your questions. And we have about 12 minutes for question time.
Hi. Does your knowledge system take account of, predict, understand what we would call the El Nino and La Nina cycles of weather across the Pacific?
I'm going to answer that. Yes. The answer is yes. Absolutely yes. It's much more complicated than I could explain here and much, much more complicated than we could present in a film. But very much so. In 1993 through 1995, there was El Nino, and it made supercharged trades, and Teleke Kaveia was completely aware of the cycles of them, etc. But he also, at that time, said things are going off. 30 years ago, things are going off. They're going off schedule. But you see all those different types, well, we would call them types of knowledge, all those related phenomena. When you have that kind of holistic system of knowledge, you are able to identify what is going off. And I want to contrast that with what I experienced in 1981 in New Ireland, Papua New Guinea, where I'd been working for a few years. And I told them I was going to the Antarctic the next year and a half. We wintered, David and I and 4 other people sailed and wintered a boat in the sea ice and did science and came back 16 months later. So when I told them we were going, far away, they said, oh, you must carry a lot of extra food because in a year it's going to start being a global phenomena. They said it's going to be everywhere the ocean goes. We're going to have droughts here in the Western Pacific. That's what happens when there's El Nino. They predicted it. And meteorologists told us, in Australia and New Zealand and the American and the British, oh, it's just normal, because we were asking for ice information, etc., weather information. 3 major ships, supply ships, sank that year. We managed to get through in a little sailboat. But it's because meteorology knew nothing about El Nino being a global phenomenon. They thought it was just something that happened along the, Antarctic to southern west coast of South America. So yeah, they're way ahead of us on that. That's just one example.
Thank you very much. It's been fascinating hearing these presentations. I just wanted to clarify one point, if I may. You mentioned, I think, that the traditional navigational techniques had effectively died out in Hawaii. And I think many of us have read about the role of the Micronesian navigators in helping to revive the traditional techniques. But can you clarify which other island groups had sustained the traditional techniques apart from places like the islands in Micronesia? Obviously, the Santa Cruz group, but were there others?
Here, here.
Fine. But which are they?
Yeah, thank you, sir. Yeah, for us who are in here in this room, yeah, that's what we're trying to do. We try to revive Papua New Guinea, Fiji, Micronesia, and yeah, and the Solomons, of course, in Taumako.
So those techniques had survived in those areas? Much of it. And elsewhere.
And elsewhere. Philippines. There's so many. Yeah, it's the whole Western Pacific has been ignored. These people came here with no support, no nothing. Thank goodness the invitations from Berlin and Vancouver for Impact 5, you know, from and Royal Institute of Navigation, thank goodness, was interested to hear and become aware of these people and what they know. This has not, there's been a lot of media, a lot of popularization about Hokulea and the Hawaii-based efforts. But their navigation system was made up in a planetarium because they had to. So we're in the next phase now. We're talking about wind compasses for the first time. You know, we have people who know the traditions here. And they're here to make long-term relationships, not just to make a media splash. They went through months and years of effort to get the paper and permits and everything to come here. Some immigration visas that were never invented before and picked up on the way to the airport.
Yeah, from Taumako, we still kept that knowledge, if I get your question right, because although the world was the technology, we have good transportation, boats to be built, but those things that have never been to mass to the Taumako. Like we have 2 times now, the last 3 years, only 2 times a vessel visited the island. We have children go to school now, so we are sorry that as children were sent to the high schools from other islands, they stay there. They come back at the end of their 3, 4, 5 years, but they can't come back. So that's why we still maintain our way of sailing. So that's why we maintain that now. Yeah, El Nino, I'm not quite sure about the English word, but in Taumako we have the wet and dry season. We experience dry season, but we are lucky that we have a Mimi here we witness. We have a culture like we are close to nature. So when we experience dry the land, there's a pool in Taumako that we have to go up there, then take a rock, drop it in that pool, and it's a big rain. So when you go to a dry season, then that's how we do it, make more rain for our crops. And if we got a very strong wind, then we have another trick that we can tell the wind to slow down. So those practices, that's something that help us from the small islands. Otherwise, yeah, we experience dry seasons in that island.
One more question, and then of course there's the break.
Good afternoon. My name is Nick Lambert. I thought it was a fantastic presentation. You made 2 very key points, Mimi. One was that we should be thinking about navigation as a holistic system, which is something that we've moved away from in the Western world. And we're now in whatever the opposite of holistic is. It's non-holistic, or it is a single point of failure, and it's called GPS. And you described that as a constellation. And those 2 points really struck home. One of the issues, there are 2 issues that I have in mind. One is that we, in the Western world, are trying to explain to our maritime navigators that has happened, that we have gone from a point where we used to be more holistic in how we navigated to a point where we are now in a single point of failure. And so we have to try to explain to younger navigators that this is what their system now is. And we also say to them, you should be mindful of, and you should be taught how to navigate more traditionally. So we might be talking about sextants or whatever. Have you thought about how you use the knowledge that is there in the Western Pacific to help guide and train young navigators who are using modern navigation systems like GPS to think about navigating in a more holistic way? What sort of, from all the things that you've learned, what advice would you give them? You should, don't bother with sections anymore, do this, or don't do that, but do this. Pull these elements through to enable you to be more holistic navigators. That was rather a long transmission, but I hope I got the point across.
I think I gotcha. And I want to say they should listen to Betty. They should fall in love with Hinora. The stories are there that tell how to make a crew, how to build a vessel, what hundreds of plants are involved, and what the performance is of each one and of the total vessel. In terms of, biodiversity, climate change, having a different cultural relationship to the world around where you don't destroy it. There are 4 traditional voyaging schools represented here. Come to them. Support them. This is, the Royal Institute of Navigation. It's the birthplace of the West, of the celestial system that Europeans use. And as you say, it was a much more holistic. And a lot of what was known, 400 years ago, 200 years ago, has not even been documented. Some of the articles in the Royal Institute of Navigation Journal, a few of them are about those ancient methods, and I think that it was started with that in mind by, what's his name, the guy who sailed Jester, Michael Ritchie, God bless him. So, So I think that Royal Institute of Navigation should be most interested, as a source of Western, modern navigation, whatever you want to call it, should be most interested in connecting with and working with and exchanging knowledge with and having students exchange with these 4 schools. And these 4 schools are struggling to exist. These people are not supported. They're doing it anyway. They're doing their best to teach young people and revive and actually perpetuate, not revive, perpetuate the knowledge. And if you can make voyages in the deep ocean, between islands, if you can go along thousands of year-old routes and networks, that's where you learn. That's where you learn how the ocean works, how the sky works. And that's where you develop the relationships with those. That's where you learn how to call the wind or see the signs that are there, but in modern navigation, we don't see them. We don't know anything about them.
Can I ask a supplementary? Sorry to hog it. Your wind compass and all that knowledge of weather, and just taking into account that lady's question about El Nino, now we have a much better understanding of weather patterns and met patterns and so on. Do you think the wind compass could be digitized? Do you think it could be made into, dare I say it in this audience, an app? Could it be digitized?
I think you could make a simple app at this point, but if you want to really know the depth and complexity of that knowledge, it's going to take some research, and it's going to take spending time with these people who can show it to you, who can introduce you. It's ancestral knowledge. And it requires a relationship. It requires becoming basically part of the family. And that's possible. they wouldn't have come here unless they were open to that, unless they were seeking students and support in order to be able to handle that kind of, do that kind of teaching. You know, Mef Hiu'ia Nolani there could have, normally, she gave up her time, so more could be for them to talk, and I'm talking too much. You know, but the story of Lata, that story that Betty, that Hinora is a founder to, the story of the first voyager, when you hear that story, as all of you are hearing it, you become a part of the story. You've already been tricked. Yeah, you're in it. So whether you engage with it or not, you know, of course, it's up to you. But you're hearing it. You can't. The basis is you know, once you've heard it, you can't pretend you didn't hear it. This is deep knowledge, and you either want to know it or you don't.
May I add something? Could I add a comment here?
Oh, please.
Yeah. On Taumako, people they use canoes basically as playpens because the canoes are deep enough that a baby cannot crawl out of one. And so perhaps a mother is out fishing on the reef, and so she'll throw the baby in the canoe. Baby's perfectly safe, but what is happening is that the baby is already assimilating the feeling of what it's like to be in shallow water, the wave patterns. And in Hawaii, we had a similar tradition until rather recently, in which grandmothers would take their grandchildren as infants, and they would sit in the water with the infants on their laps in their mu'umu'us. And yes, it was fun for the infant. The infant would stay cool on a hot day, but really what was happening was they were beginning to absorb the knowledge. And as Mimi says, this kind of knowledge system is something that's acquired through a lifetime. It's not something you can take a semester at university and go out and navigate your way halfway across the Pacific. No, it requires years and years of using your eyes, your mind, your ears, all of your senses, and your body as well. And so I'm saying, you want to get people started, train your babies, take your babies out, and yeah, I'm serious. Do this. You can do this. You can start it in a swimming pool and then take them to the beach and get them to understand here in their bodies what it's like. And it goes on from there, and teach them to use their eyes, not to look at the phone and go like that, but to look at what's going on out there. Look at the sun. Where does the sun rise? Listen to the sound of the wind, and you will hear it. Listen to the voices of the trees. You will hear them. But as I say, the way is to start them early. So those of you that have babies, listen up. Get them out there.
Thank you so much, Luke and Betty and Mimi, for this wonderful panel. And before I introduce our next two wonderful speakers, let me just very briefly pick up the last commenter's point about how can the knowledge holders in this room help Western science. I think we should reverse that question first and ask, how can we help those sciences to actually exist and share their knowledge in the first place? These people need to be able to build boats. They need to build boat sheds, and they need to build schools to train their young. And unless they can't do this, they can't help. So universities, institutions, rich ones, they have an obligation, I think, to do that.